No, your eyes do not deceive you. It is the end of September as I record this. I'm actually on time for once. This is my wrap up for everything I read in September. Hey everyone, it's Ray and welcome to my little bookish corner of the world. As ever, it is always changing because I keep on getting more books, and I had a couple arrive just this morning that are going to go on the TBR for the next couple of months. Anyway, today you're not here to hear me talk about the books that are coming up. You're here to hear me say everything I read in September. And while I have to admit I was initially really cautious about saying I was going to read into the double digits because the month started so slowly, I actually made it. So today I'm going to be going through the 11 books I read. I'm going to talk about the highs, I'm going to talk about the lows, and I'm also going to direct you to the video I recorded about the 1-star review picks that I read in September, and of course the ones I will be reading into October. So I'm going to actually start with the first book I read in September, and that was Her Majesty's Royal Coven by Juno Dawson. I do have the sequel on my shelf, so I am going to read that at some point. I absolutely, as much as I don't like the colour pink, though apparently it suits me, I don't know. This cover really stands out and I loved it. I enjoyed the book, I liked the character development, and I honestly have to say that I don't think it necessarily needs a sequel. It ended in such a place that, yeah, it would have left you with a lot of questions, but I think that it was still very good for the ending. As I said, I do have the sequel on my bookcase, and it's adding a nice bolt of colour to an otherwise relatively plain shelf, mostly stripes and dark. But yeah, I enjoyed this, and apparently Juno Dawson lives somewhere relatively nearby. I don't know, I have never seen her. So yeah, that was my first book of the month, and it was actually an overhang from August, as much as I don't like having them, which is why I haven't started a book today on the 30th of September. As much as I don't enjoy having an overhang from one month into the next, sometimes it's unavoidable, and this one was unavoidable as I tried desperately to get something finished for the end of the end of last month. The next book is actually one of the last ones I read in the month, and it was kind of put in there because it was the Agatha Christie read along for September, though it was actually one of the options, as I'd already read the actual pick, and that was A Cat Among the Pigeons. Again, as I said already, it's an Agatha Christie. It's also a Poirot, and like Taken at the Flood, which I found an unexpected read, this one did a similar thing. It takes place at a very exclusive all-girls boarding school, or the vast majority of it does, and there are so many twists and turns as always. It was very cleverly done. I didn't guess who'd done it. I didn't really guess the motivation. I had a few ideas, and just when you think everything has been solved, another mystery pops up that has kind of been underpinning everything all along. And Hercule Poirot, as much as I love him, he isn't a massive part of this book, though it is marketed as a Hercule Poirot mystery. I definitely would recommend it. I heartily enjoyed it. In fact, it was probably my favourite of my Agatha Christie reads for this year so far. The next one sadly hits the bottom of the list, and that was the hyped up and massively popular The Pumpkin Spice Cafe by Laurie Gilmore. I have to admit, actually, from the start, I have to be completely honest, I am not an autumn or fall girl. I am definitely summer all the way. The minute everyone says, oh, I'm looking forward to getting my jumpers and everything out, I'm like, oh no. Jumper season has started, and it definitely has begun over here. But I did not enjoy this book. I found it incredibly predictable, And as I was reading it, I found myself seeing other books that I have read and enjoyed over the course probably of this year. And they were At First Spite by Olivia Dade and a novel love story by Ashley Poston, which I read a couple of months ago. I know this came out last year, so it could be said that this inspired those. However, I found it quite uninteresting, uninspiring. I definitely won't be picking up the next one. And this is our book club book for October. We didn't have a meeting in September due to holiday and everything else. So this is our meeting for October, which takes place as I'm recording this next week. And I can honestly say that it didn't entrance me. It didn't make me feel anything for the characters. I found that I think that the trope of poor communication is one that is hugely overdone, and I don't enjoy it. But if that is your trope and this is your thing, I'm not going to yuck your yum. It's just not a book that I enjoyed. The next book was actually the last book I read this month, and I can honestly say I jumped over the moon when I got the copy. I saw everybody, well, not everybody, but a large number of my contacts over on Instagram posting how they'd received their proof of the latest Jill Mansell. And I thought, oh no, am I no longer on the press list? And I really did sit there thinking, I'm not going to get this book. And then Saturday morning it was delivered. I'd already picked my book up for Saturday, which I will talk about in a moment. So I was hoping among hope that this would be what the parcel was. And when I opened it, and it was, yeah, I read this in an afternoon. I wasn't feeling particularly well over the weekend. I had a bit of a cold and my sinuses were playing up. So I didn't really want to do anything massively energetic. And I ended up reading a couple more books, which really boosted me over into the double digits. So yeah, this is Jill Mansell's An Almost Perfect Summer. If you like a story that isn't too trite, too twee, has moments of real heart, things that make you laugh, can make you quite cross, and actually make you go, thank God you did that, it was the right decision, then this is 100% the sort of book that I think you'd enjoy. It is women's literature, also previously known as chick lit, and it comes out in January next year, and I really was very, very happy to get it. So thank you incredibly to Headline for sending me this copy, because it's going on the shelf next to my other two, and I'm really happy I got it. Next book I read was another sequel, and that was Apprentice to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Mehra. This is a sequel to Assistant to the Villain. I needed something light-hearted and funny, so this is what I picked up on Friday afternoon when I finished work, and I read through it incredibly quickly. It was an afternoon's read. I finished work at 12:30, and I'd finished this by about 7 o'clock that evening. I enjoyed it. I found it was a funny, light-hearted romp. Yeah, there are the magical aspects to it. The characters continued the development that they had in Assistant to the Villain. There were moments where I thought, oh, really? This is a bit too young, too silly for me. But at the same time, I think that's what I needed, because I'd had, up to that point, a few heavy reads and some that I hadn't enjoyed that much. So Apprentice to the Villain was an okay, fun story. It was a great addition to the series. I do want to read the next one when it comes out. Obviously, this was only released a few weeks ago. And yeah, I think that's all I can say about it. So that was Apprentice to the Villain, book number 5 of the month. Book number 6 of the month was The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow. This was actually the first book I read in September, and I picked it purposely first because it is probably the thickest book that I have read for a few months. I think the other really, really heavy duty book I read was Empire of the Vampire by J. Kristoff, which I read earlier this year. So this is a continuation of Pride and Prejudice, covering the journey of Mary, the middle sister, as she copes after her father has passed away and the property Longbourn has been entailed to their cousin Mr. Collins, and her mother are the only people left who have nowhere really to go. It talks about her finding her feet, finding her position, her place, and who she really wants to be. The first half of the book, as I have talked about extensively in a video where I discuss the 1-star review picks, my reads for September, it is the first half of the book I found I struggled with a little bit. However, the second half moves on. The plot is very, very quickly developed. Mary's character changes and grows far more in that second half of the book once she's free of her mother's influence. So I enjoyed this once I got past the first half. So while I can understand the review that led me to pick this book, I don't agree with it. But that's The Other Bennett Sister, which was the first book I read this month, and book 6 on this pile, which is possibly going to fall over at some point. The second to last book I read this month was a reread, and it is a go-to when I don't feel well. And it was also I was almost inspired to pick this up after Dame Maggie Smith passed away, because she plays the role of cousin Charlotte Bartlett in the film version of A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. This is a go-to book for me. It is, if you can't hear, my voice is a little bit strained. It is a fantastic story, beautifully written. The film is incredible as well, but every time I sit down to read this book, I am just filled with the desire to visit Florence, but also to just give both George and Lucy a massive, great big hug. I love their characters. I enjoy the writing. I have got a few other Forsters on my shelf. And this actually is a copy that I purchased back in 1985. So not doing too bad. Next book is The Beholders by Hester Messon. It is historical mystery. There is a lot of darkness. It covers many horrific themes, child endangerment, familial abuse. It is incredibly dark in many ways, and if this is based on fact, then yuck. It is well written. I didn't enjoy it, and I think that's partially because I struggled with the themes themselves. I would say for some people this would require a trigger warning. It is quite a distressing story, and you really have to push through the more awful events to get to feel better about the characters. Harriet, the central character in this book, is a maid in the 1800s in the household of a well-respected politician and his wife. They've got a young son who goes missing, and then a child's body is found in the Thames, and it is assumed by everybody that the son was killed by his mother. So it is a story of everything that goes on, the horrific events that are underlying the overarching story of the child going missing and being found dead. So yeah, this one it's well written. As I said, it's well written, but it wasn't a story that I would hurriedly pick up again, but I would recommend it if you do enjoy a darker historical mystery. There's no blood and gore or anything, but it's just, I think, the underlying negative aspects of the characters that you need to be aware of. Next one is To Cage a God by Elizabeth May. This is a proof copy, and this is the third and final 1-star review pick for September. It was okay. It wasn't amazing. I think that the good thing about this book is the fact that while it is part of a duology, you don't really have to read the second book to get a complete story. I liked the development of the characters. I enjoyed the relationships that they were in. However, I do think that it didn't need to be quite as long. So the review says, thank goodness it's short, because then I can get through it quickly. However, I don't think that something nearly 500 pages is a short book. The characters are well rounded, but this is an issue I've had a few times with fantasy novels in the last few years, and that is the fact that the authors are growing, I wouldn't say lazy, I'd say slightly complacent, and there is no longer the required backstory. So we're not getting the world building that we have been receiving in many other great fantasy and romantasy novels. It's almost as though it's felt to be unnecessary. In this book, the backstory would have been incredibly helpful because they are introducing words and terms that as a reader you're not necessarily familiar with, and you're expected to just jump into the middle of an event and understand what's going on. So I do think that this could have done with a bit more backstory, a bit more world building before we got to the events that actually encompass the story itself. The next book is actually one I read over on NetGalley. I placed a request for it a while ago, and I know that you have heard me talk about Agatha Raisin multiple times, and despite the fact that the author, the original creator of the character, has now sadly passed away back in 2019, the mantle has been picked up by an author, R.W. Green, and the latest number 35 in the series, Killing Time, is due for release in October, and I managed to luckily get an advanced reader copy in September. I devoured this book in a couple of hours, and I know that it's not a very popular opinion, but I'm going to say it anyway. I do like R.W. Green's interpretation of Agatha. I find that he has made her a far warmer, more receptive character. She's no longer, there are elements of her character that are still quite bitter and angry at the world for getting older, but he just doesn't make them the entire center of her focus, of her being. I enjoy the relationship, the to and fro, will they, won't they, of Agatha and Charles Fraith. And it seems that Charles has developed far more strong tundra for Agatha in these latest books, which I enjoy. I know that a lot of people, and I've read a number of reviews that have said that they should have just stopped when MC Beaton passed away, because R.W. Green is not doing her due service. I disagree. And I know, as I said, that's not going to be a popular view, but I enjoyed Killing Time far more than I have enjoyed some of the earlier books, including There Goes the Bride, which I found was so convoluted and so unnecessarily so. Wow, that was a lot of uses of the word so. It was an unnecessarily complicated and convoluted plot that was not needed. There were too many extra things added at the end of the book that didn't seem to have any purpose. And I like the fact that R.W. Green seems to have got rid of some of that. He isn't introducing additional lines of complexity that we don't need in these storylines. So that Killing Time, which is book 35 in the series, I enjoyed, and I will definitely add to my shelf when it comes out in paperback next year. But I would also say, if you enjoy the TV series, you'll probably prefer the latter plots more than the early ones in book form. And I'm not being judgy, I just find that MC Beaton has imparts a very negative outlook on women, and I don't know why. It is something I will cover, I think I've mentioned in my previous Agatha Raisin video, which I will link to. But I do think that that is something that maybe if you aren't too keen on the fat shaming, the depressive, I'm getting really old at Agatha, then read the later books, and that particular aspect of her character isn't used quite so much. So that was book 10, and the final book is Holmes and Moriarty by Gareth Rubin. This is an authorised sequel to the Sherlock Holmes series, and by Gareth Rubin, who wrote The Turnglass, which has been proved to be a very popular book. I believe it's laid out quite differently to most other novels, and I enjoyed this. I like a good Sherlock Holmes mystery. I enjoyed Hound of the Baskervilles and many of his other stories, Sign of 4, and I liked the TV show Actually, I preferred Elementary to BBC's Sherlock, and I know that's probably not the done thing, but I also preferred Jeremy Brett as Sherlock. So yeah, I have a nice complicated relationship with that particular character. I do think that this book handled the characters really well. I also think that Moriarty could have done with a better, bigger character in the book overall. There were a few complicated twists and turns that may not have been necessary, but overall the book was very well done, and I liked the idea of Holmes and Moriarty actually teaming up together. Well, that's it. That's my 11 books for this month. I'm hoping that I'm going to get more read in October, because I still have a few thousand words, a few thousand pages to read on my Storygraph challenge, though I have completed both my Storygraph and my Goodreads book total challenges. How have you done one of those? How are you doing with it? Have you read any of these books? Do you think I've been fair in my reviews of these? Do you think that I should maybe pick up another book by one of these authors and give them another chance if I have no intention of doing so? I'd love to hear from you, so don't forget to like this video to get the algorithm going, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe and leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, bye.